My parents struggled with infertility and knew they wanted a family, and adoption was the path. My dad was predictable. I knew what to expect with him. His work ethic was my role model. My mom, she was the epitome of hospitality. She told me I was adopted from the very beginning, that God chose me for the family, and I liked being adopted. As I was growing up, I did like most adopted kids do, and I wonder what my birth mother's like. And my mom was always supportive, and she would say, well, why don't you go look and find her? I was 20 years old, and I looked up the adoption agency I was from and called them and said, hey, I want to meet my birth mother. And so I would go on that journey to meet her. I'd seen enough TV movies. I knew that meant a 6-month search. They would come back and tell me they couldn't find her. But they called me 2 days later and they said, we found your birth mom and she wants to meet you. We made arrangements to go out and meet. There was no anxiety, there was no nervousness, and everything was fine until I knocked on that door and I heard the words on the other side of the door, that's him, he's here. My heart started racing. But she, Gail, my birth mom, and her daughter, Kara, opened the door. I go in, along with her husband, Tommy. The 4 of us are sitting in the living room, and Gail and I are both, you could just tell, flustered. It's that awkward conversation. What do I say? What does she say? You know, and Tommy, her husband, was a champion. He wasn't threatened by any of this. He helped navigate that conversation, keep it going. And of course, Kara, he was just a giddy little kid. She was dating an older boy, and he had beaten her, bad enough that she had to explain some cuts and bruises to her parents as a car wreck. And so she broke off that relationship, but simultaneously discovered that she was pregnant. She went to her parents. You couldn't go get an abortion, but yet they were affluent and well-connected, and they could. And that's what they said to her, is that we can get you an abortion. And she said no. And she chose life, and she chose adoption for me. And when I found that out, I promised God that I would do anything, anytime, anywhere for the cause of life. 2 years later, though, I found myself in a promiscuous relationship. An unplanned pregnancy occurred, and I did what most guys do. I gave that blank stare of denial. I knew it was wrong. I didn't want to do it, but at the same time, I didn't want to be in that relationship. So I took her to the clinic and had our child terminated through an abortion. I went back to my place and I just sat on the end of my bed, just wailing, weeping, crying. You know, I felt desperate. I felt despair. What I had just done was robbed myself of my child's life. I couldn't believe I did it because of what had happened for me. It was like, look at your blessing. How could you not do the same? And so I promised him again that I would do anything, anytime, anywhere for the cause of life. 10 years later, I'm working for Dr. Mineth, who was the #1 Christian psychiatrist in the country. I had a corner office. I was the director of marketing. Everything was in line with what I wanted. This woman says, Brad, I was given your name. And I'm like, yeah, right, from who? And she says, that doesn't matter. God wants me to talk to you about running this pregnancy helpline. And inside I said, are you crazy? No way. I knew what that meant. But I heard you said anything, anytime, anywhere. I go to my wife in puzzlement. I come to her and I say, I really believe God's telling me I need to do this pregnancy helpline thing. So I called the chairman of the board who had done the interview, and he thanked me and said, we've made a decision to go in a different direction. I was like, okay, now I can go do my thing. It's the chairman of the board from the helpline, and he says, we were wrong. We need to do what God was telling us to do and see if you'll come be a part of this endeavor. When I was meeting with the chairman of the board, he shared that they were serving 30 women a month. 22 years later, when I would leave the organization, we were serving 5.6 million people a month. It wasn't too long into our married life that we would discover that infertility was going to be a challenge. My wife knew my story, and it was never a question for her, to pursue adoption. I was actually doing a training in Jacksonville, Florida, of which part of it included the aspect of infertility that my wife and I were going through. This woman in the audience immediately felt God say, "You're going to help this family get a baby." She would go home, and 2 weeks later, a friend of hers would call and say, "Hey, Dottie, it's Tracy. My daughter Ryan is pregnant. She wants to know if you know a Christian couple outside of Florida that would be open to adopt." Ryan and her parents and my wife and I got on the phone. We kept talking and just falling in love with Ryan. She was such a special young lady. Ryan called us the week of Christmas, and she said, "I'm going to be traveling. I don't know if I'll be able to call you, so I'm doing it now because I want to make sure I give you the best Christmas present ever and let you know you're going to be the parents of this baby." The scan goes up. Mark turns to me and he says, "Congratulations, Dad, you're going to have a son." And then he says, "Have you thought about names?" I said, "Well, my wife and I, we didn't know if it was a boy or girl. We've been talking about names. We were leaning towards Grant Michael, but we hadn't made a decision." And then he looks me square in the eye and he says, "Grant Michael. His initials will be GM. And that stands for grace and mercy. And that's what this adoption is all about." And I looked him square in the eye and I said, "His name is Grant Michael." My friend called me and said, "Would you and Len be open, to praying about and adopting, a second?" We started talking about what that might look like, and we felt like God affirmed. And so we called back and said, we're open to it. She's on the phone and just kind of chit-chatting, maybe asking some irrelevant questions, but carrying the conversation. And Diana just says, "Okay, I'm done chatting. Now I want to tell you why I called and let you know that you guys are going to be the parents of this baby." My wife and I flew out to be a part of her graduation on a Friday night from high school. My daughter was scheduled for a C-section or cesarean on Monday. We were there in the hospital and we got to be right there to support Diana as she went through it. My birth mom was my hero, and she still is. When I look at my kids' birth mothers, they gave us the opportunity to be called mom and dad. It changed our lives, and so they were heroes. My name's Brad Imler, and I am that kid.